What's up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back. I've got you the pool predictions on at least my opinions. It's going to be hard to predict these. And I got the power rankings for you guys just before CWL London to give you more of a look on the inside of each of these teams and what you could potentially expect as far as where they might place. Now, my Fort Worth predictions were a little all over the place. I think I've done a little bit better job of kind of looking at the pools and putting teams where they might fall in the bracket and what their outcome could potentially be at the very end of the tournament. Let's start in Pool A, though, first. As we take a look, it will be 100 Thieves with OpTic Gaming, Enigma 6, and Reciprocity. This is a very interesting pool. If you look at the top, 100 Thieves by far has the best case as far as being a team that escapes from this pool of death. And this is 100% the pool of death because all four of these teams could potentially finish in the winner's side of the pool. 100 Thieves, though, I think has the best possible chance, though. As you take a look at their records against these teams, you start with OpTic Gaming. They're 1-0 against OpTic. It was the 3-0 that they just recently found against OpTic in the cross div. 3-0. Keep that in mind, okay? That's not bad at all. It's actually incredibly good considering that there's a lot of hype around OpTic in that cross div. Up against Enigma 6, they are 3-0 in set score with a 9-3 map record against Enigma 6. Now, this is a different Enigma 6 roster, and they're going to be playing a lot more aggressively and a lot more loosely. However, I just don't really see the SMG line being at the same level as 100 Thieves. Enable has played better. We've seen Priesta be a monster. Kenny has played a lot better as well. This whole 100 Thieves roster has gotten very, very good, and I think that they're going to be probably one of the best prepared teams coming in. So, again, 3-0 against Enigma 6 in their time, and that goes back to the second week of CWL, as well as twice at Fort Worth, where they won 3-2 and 3-1 on LAN against Enigma 6. One of those matches, if you remember back, was when Priesta was sick, and Pharaoh had to sub in late against Enigma 6, and they were still able to win out against E6. So, some considerations there. And then Reciprocity is the only team they've lost to here. It's a 1-1 record for them, a 4-3 map differential, and it was a very close set against Reciprocity when they last fought, which was actually at Fort Worth, if you remember back. Again, without Pharaoh. It was a 1-3 map win-loss ratio there in that matchup. So that's something to kind of keep in mind of why Reciprocity potentially finished in the top 3 and 100 Thieves did not. That could very well be a 2-0. If there's any team to finish 3-0 in this pool, it would be 100 Thieves. Do I see them doing that? No, I don't see them going 3-0 simply because Enigma 6 and Reciprocity have so many different factors going for them. We'll talk about them in a moment. Let's go over to OpTic Gaming, though, to talk about their win-loss record. Again, against 100 Thieves, they had that 0-3 loss. Against Enigma 6, they've played them once. It was a 3-2 win. That came during the first day of the cross-divisional play. And it was, to be completely candid, a little bit one-sided, and it was one-sided on one side or the other. It was a 250 to 84 and a 250 to 189 hard points, a 2-6 loss on frequency search and destroy, and a 6-1 win on payload, and an 0-3 loss on control. My biggest worry for this OpTic team is their control. Their control has not been good in the cross-divisional. They actually are 0-4 in the cross-div. They were much better, though, when they played at Fort Worth, where they went 4-1 in control. So a couple of question marks as far as what happened to this OpTic team in control specifically. And then against Reciprocity, they're also 1-1 there, a 5-4 map loss differential, where they won 3 of the 4 hard points, lost all 3 search and destroys, but won both controls. So some considerations there. I see OpTic Gaming being the other team that finishes in the winner's bracket, the top 2 of this pool. And I see 100 Thieves and OpTic Gaming both finishing 2-1. I think OpTic loses to 100 Thieves, but has a way to beat Enigma 6 and Reciprocity. It's kind of the way it goes. It very well could go somewhere else, but I think that OpTic Gaming will come back more prepared, ready to go, with a couple of those role swaps that we saw happening during the cross div, where they looked a lot better, except for versus 100 Thieves. And I see this team potentially coming out on top and being a top 2 team in the pool. Let's jump over to Enigma 6, though, because this is a team that I think can potentially play spoilers. With the additions of GodRx and Jetly, this team is going to become that much more full and that much more strong up front. And beyond that, General will finally feel comfortable running an ICR. This is a team that did well against Reciprocity. They are 1-1 against Rec with a 5-3 map loss differential. The times that they played Reciprocity were at Fort Worth and at the cross-divisional, where they lost 2-3 in the cross-divisional, beat Reciprocity at Fort Worth 3-0. We're back. It was a very close set all the way through, 250 to 226, 6-2, and 3-1. So not super close, but still relatively close. It could have gone 4, if not 5 games. So Enigma 6, I think, could potentially play spoilers in this pool, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the top 2. But they would be a little bit more of a surprise than I think OpTic would. That's kind of why I had them finishing in the bottom 2. This is such a hard pool to predict. For Reciprocity, you take a look at them. We've already talked about the win-loss ratios. And again, I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the top 2. But to be candid, I don't see them beating 100 Thieves. And I see them dropping a game to either Enigma 6 or OpTic, which would put them out of the running. The only way this pool gets really interesting is if each of the bottom 3 teams listed there in the graphic beat each other once and everybody loses to 100 Thieves. That's the only way this pool gets really interesting, if there's 3 1-2 ties. 1-2 map loss ties, which will be really interesting because it could very well happen that way. Reciprocity, though, very well could, like we mentioned, finish in the top, but with their win-loss ratios and how they've looked against other teams that are up in the upper echelons, I just don't see them doing super well. Again, they lost 0-3 to 100 Thieves in the cross div. This was after they had beat 100 Thieves 3-1 at Fort Worth, but again, that was with Pharaoh instead of Priesta. And then the times that they played OpTic, again, they're 1-1 there. It was a 1-3 loss the first time and a 3-2 win the second time. And similar story with Enigma 6 as well. It was an 0-3 loss to Enigma 6 and then a 3-2 win versus Enigma 6. So this pool, very, very close. Hard to predict, but I have 100 Thieves and OpTic at top at a 2-1 score, Enigma 6 and Reciprocity at a 1-2 score each. I wouldn't put any money on this pool, though, if I were you. Let's go over to Pool B. Luminosity, Splyce, Denial, and Gen G will be the teams that make up this pool, which will be a very interesting one. Again, Denial making a lot of changes as far as what that roster will look like. But let's start with Luminosity first. Again, they are your Fort Worth champions. The only team that they lost to at Fort Worth was in the pools against Splyce. It was a 1-3, and then they would come back and beat Splyce 3-1 in both the winners finals and grand finals, if you remember back. Cross-divisional, not nearly as convincing, actually wasn't convincing at all, as they finished off their cross div 2-2, every single game going to map 5. Their losses were to Envy and Heretics, and their wins were versus E United, and at the time it was Accelerate Gaming. Here against Gen G, they have beat Gen G a single time and lost to them a single time. It was a 2-3 loss in week number 2 of their divisional play, and then a 3-2 win at Fort Worth. So we will definitely get this best of 3 set match between these two teams. Personally, I don't see Luminosity beating Gen G this time around. I think Luminosity at Fort Worth, the reason why they were able to beat teams that honestly they probably shouldn't have was simply because of the Rampart strategy that nobody seemed to be ready for until late. Even then, no one was really seemed to be ready for it. And the only teams that gave Luminosity a fight at Fort Worth were Gen G. And how about this? Accelerate. Also a 3-2 was the scoreline there. I do have them beating Denial, no problem. They have yet to play Denial. This is a different Denial team, mostly consisting of Red Reserve, which the last time that Luminosity played Red Reserve, it was a 1-3 win for them. That happened way back in week number 1 of the divisional, so you can throw away that stat line for what it's worth. And then they play Splyce again. And again, we already talked about how they did against Splyce. They're so far 2-1 against them in the set scores, 7-5 in maps. And again, this team is a little bit all over the place. I have them beating Splyce, but losing to Gen G, and I have them beating Denial. So I have this team finishing over at a 2-1 stat line. Going down a little bit further to Splyce, a lot of people seem to be conversing that Splyce could potentially win this bracket, or this pool rather, and I don't really see eye to eye with that. Now, the Splyce team is good, but you have to consider they lost 1-3 just in the cross-divisional recently to Gen G, and they lost 2-3 versus OpTic at the time, while they squeaked out wins versus Reciprocity and Midnight at a 3-1 scoreline. And again, like we mentioned, in the 3 times they played Luminosity at Fort Worth, they lost 2 of them, and that was in the winners and grand finals. They were only able to take Luminosity a single time, and that was before Luminosity was using the Rampart strategy. So, is it possible that Splyce beats Luminosity this time around with the Rampart not being nearly as formidable as it was? Yes. However, I think Luminosity is going to be too strong on LAN again. I don't see Splyce beating them here, so I have them just beating Denial. So Splyce I have finishing at a 1-2 scoreline, which brings us to Denial next, which is a new roster. Again, keep in mind, 3 of the players are actually from Red Reserve, as you have Joe, Rated, and Bance. That's going to be finished up with Alex and Brack to the roster. And if you remember from my video yesterday, I was saying that this team could be good, but I don't see them ever being a major contender with this roster. There's too many holes, too many weaknesses, and just not enough all-star strength anywhere. There are some good players, but there are no great players, I don't think, necessarily, in this title on this roster. I don't see them winning a game. They might take a couple of sets to the distance of going 4 or 5, but I don't see them winning a set versus Splyce, LG, or Gen G. I have them finishing 0-3 in this pool, which leaves us with Gen G, who personally, I have them going 3-0 in this pool. I think that they're one of the strongest teams at London coming in. I talked about this team at length when it came to Fort Worth and their additions of Envoy, who honestly, it's a good long-term solution, but in the short term, it left some holes for them. You think back to what they were able to do in the cross-divisional play. 3-1 versus Denial, which was the all-French team at the time, a 3-1 versus Splyce, and a 3-1 versus Enigma 6. They would lose to 100 Thieves 1-3, but it was a very competitive set. 192 to 250, 240 to 250 were the two hard points, a 6-5 win in Search and Destroy, which, by the way, that was where they were weakest at Fort Worth, was in Search and Destroy. They have since gotten a lot better at it. And then they lost 0-3 to 100 Thieves on the Control, which is a mode that they've been kind of back and forth on. This is a team that's 20-13 in hardpoint, 16-7 in Search, only 9-8 in Control, but honestly, that's not even that bad. I have them beating up these teams pretty considerably, with maybe the exception of Splyce. I think that game could go well. I think that they're going to be able to handle LG without much of an issue without them using ramparts. I just think that in the front line, they're just being too dominant. I just don't see this SOG line of Envoy and Havoc losing out to anybody in this pool. Maybe with the exception of what Splyce has to offer, because let's be honest, when you look at Jerd and Temp, they can be very, very good. I just don't see them getting beat up too much by the Splyce squad. So I've got Gen G going 3-0 in this pool, just to remind you. LG at 2-1, Splyce at 1-2. This really comes down to the LG Splyce matchup, and Denial at 0-3. Let's take a look at Pool C. That consists of E United, Team Envy, Evil Geniuses, and FaZe Clan. And again, for 3 of these 4 rosters, there were some considerable changes. FaZe Clan, again, taking over the spot that Red Reserve left, and that would be a roster that would consist of a number of other players, most of them previous FaZe or FaZe Clan Black. But I'm going to start with E United first, again, because they are up top. This is a very good roster and have shown a lot of prevalence, but not necessarily against these teams specifically. They have not beat Team Envy a single time. In fact, how about this? The 2 times they've played Team Envy, they've lost 0-3 both times. One of those happening at Fort Worth and the other happening in the second week of Divisional. 2 0-3 losses. And again, that Fort Worth loss was in pools. Not great. Not great at all. However, versus Evil Geniuses, again, a very different Evil Geniuses team. They did beat them there, but it was only at a 3-2 scoreline. And then FaZe Clan, those two teams played was in the last day of the cross divisional, which E United won at a 3-2 scoreline, if you could consider that for anything, which I personally don't think you can. Now, this is the interesting thing about this pool. E United, I think that they are the strongest team here. They should be the strongest team here, but I don't see them going 3-0 in the pool. I see them potentially getting surprised by somebody like Evil Geniuses or FaZe, but more importantly, I'm interested to see what they're able to do day 1, Game 1 against Team Envy. That's their first matchup. Again, they have not taken a map from Team Envy, and Team Envy, and personally, I think, just got better. So I personally have Team Envy winning their game, and then E United beating FaZe and Evil Geniuses. I think those will be good games, though, so I have E United going 2-1. Switching over to Team Envy. Again, we talked about their success versus United, so we don't have to re-hit that one at all. But you take a look at what they've been able to do against Evil Geniuses in the past. It was actually a loss that Team Envy faced against Evil Geniuses at a 1-3 scoreline. That happened in the cross-divisional just recently. And then the Red Reserve team that they, again, played, but didn't really play this version of the FaZe Clan, they're technically 1-1 against Scraps and Zero, a 3-5 record there. This team is just so inconsistent, with the exception of being able to essentially notably beat United. I still have Team Envy, though, coming out of this pool at a 2-1 scoreline. It just comes down to what are they going to be able to do versus Evil Geniuses and FaZe. I think that this pool is very difficult to predict, and I would stay away from it if you're a betting person, at least until you see how Evil Geniuses and FaZe look with these new put-together rosters. Team Envy, I think, got better with this roster, so you need to be scared of this team if you're United, and then you should feel pretty comfortable versus Evil Geniuses, and should be pretty comfortable against FaZe Clan as well. It just comes down to, will Pharaoh, the newest addition with Decimate, be able to actually step up? I think Decimate will shine with Huke in the front line with him. It just comes down to, will Pharaoh be able to match up with Silly? That's kind of the biggest question mark, is that Maddox line, which has been very okay, I would say, lately, while you're getting rid of Assault and keeping Aches. So interesting stats there, but I think that you're going to see Envy come out 2-1, which will then bring us over to Evil Geniuses. I like this roster a lot more. However, I don't see them doing enough work to be all that significant here. They've got Exotic and Attached still sticking with Apathy joining in from Envy, JCap from E United sub-roster technically, and Phantoms from FC Black. I see them winning a game. I just don't know against who, and it's going to be hard to predict who. But I have them going 1-2 in the pool. It's hard to even relate to their stat lines against these squads, again, because this roster is so different. But you have to take some solace in the fact that Team Envy lost to this squad at a 1-3 scoreline, so that's good for them. However, they've not done super great against the other two teams. Again, we mentioned the 0-1 versus E United. It was a 2-3 map win-loss ratio there. But more importantly, against what was the Red Reserve team, 0-2 with 0-6 being the map total. So this FaZe Clan team, you would think have a pretty steep advantage against Evil Geniuses. It just comes down to, will Evil Geniuses surprise E United or Team Envy? I think they can. I think they could even surprise the FaZe Clan roster. I just don't know how likely it'll be. I still have FaZe Clan in here also going 1-2 because of it. So this should be kind of, I have this predicted to go 2-1 for our top two teams, 1-2 for our bottom two teams. We've talked enough really about what this team has done previously, but again, how much does that really matter when two of them are coming out of Red Reserve and the other three are mostly FaZe players? But my biggest question comes down to, will Zuma show up and will Zero show up? That's the big question. This is a very difficult group as far as other ICRs that Zero's going to have to go up against, so it's not going to be an easy walk in the park for him to kind of get the Fuego feeling. But again, this is a roster that could be fueled by the EU crowd behind them. We'll see what happens as we go into Pool D. Midnight, Heretics, UIU, Elevate. Throw a dart at a dartboard, because I don't know how you're going to guess this one's, but I have this one going a little bit more one-sided, I think, than most other pools. And stop me before I get too ahead of myself. Let's start with Midnight first. This Midnight team, since they came into Fort Worth, has not been very good. They've won 2 games. Granted, one of them was versus 100 Thieves. The other was against Enigma 6, but both of those wins came in the cross-divisional. They also lost to the then French team of Denial, and they also lost to Splyce. So when you take a look at what they're going to be able to do against Elevate, again, it's hard to predict. You're going to be getting Whalers and Breezy again, which you just lost to that team when they were playing in Denial. And then you're going to be dealing with most of the Red Reserve squad, which last time they played Red Reserve was only once, and they beat them at a 3-2 scoreline, but that was in the old roster was here. So a lot of question marks about this team. I have them going 1-2 in this pool. I have them beating Elevate and not beating UIU or Heretics, only because I just don't see enough practice in this team to make them any more formidable than what they previously were at Fort Worth, where they didn't win a game in pools and they lost very early to UIU at an 0-3 scoreline. So I just don't think this team has got it in them to do much more than beat Elevate, unfortunately. And we'll switch on down to where Heretics are. And this team, again, I piped them up so hard for Fort Worth and was extremely let down by their pool play, where they went 0-3 before they would eventually win 2 of their games in the losers bracket, beating EXG and also beating Team Envy. Here they're going to be going up against UIU, a team that they've never beat before, by the way, or really won many maps before. At least in the CWL, they're 0-6 in maps versus UIU. I see this one going differently, though. Again, the last 2 times they played UIU, the first time they got a shot at this UIU team was at Fort Worth, where they lost 0-3, and then again in the cross-div, where they lost 0-3. But I see this team after, again, they made some role swaps at Fort Worth, which is why I think they were a little bit unprepared. I think they're going to be stronger going in, and I have them beating UIU, beating Elevate, and beating Midnight. I have this team going 3-0 in the pools. And then past that, honestly, I don't have them winning another game, depending on what their winner bracket matchup will be, which is probably not going to be very favorable. And then whatever their losers bracket game would be, which, again, whoever escapes from the first round of the losers bracket, I think could give Heretics a run for their money. So I have them doing well in pools because this pool is so simple, and then not doing well at all past that. So we'll consider that as we go into the power rankings later. UIU, again, a team that made a lot of switch-ups. I'm excited about this squad, but not as excited as I once was. I just don't think the royalty edition for Night was all that great. I don't think I gave them that much of a boost. And I have them beating Elevate, but I also have them being Midnight before losing to Heretics. So I have this team also going 2-1. And then for Elevate, I just don't see them winning more than 2 maps, personally. I just don't think this team's very good. I just don't know what the roster decision was, but I don't see this roster going all that well for them, and I don't see them doing well at all here at London so quickly after the roster changes were made. Now, as I'm looking at the time of this video, it's actually a pretty long one, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this here as the pool predictions, then immediately start filming the power rankings video, so you should be able to get a link to that pretty quickly. I'll leave it in the description actually as well, so if you want to get a link to see what the power rankings will look like and what I think as far as total placements, you can check all that out on my next video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Sorry this one was a little long-winded, but I wanted to give a more in-depth breakdown of each of the teams, and we did go a little bit longer than I anticipated, as I mentioned, but we'll cut it here. We'll see you in the next one for the power rankings, and of course throughout the rest of CWL London over the weekend I will be doing individual recaps on each of the days, so make sure you stay tuned, like and subscribe, and do all the fun jazzy stuff with the channel, and we'll hopefully catch you guys back next time. Until then, later, bye bye.